In this short video, I am going to verbalize some of the thinking that I had as I reviewed project number one. And I have selected for you right here an actual sample from one of the students' project number one. I'll talk about just the first source that was used to support the identified problem. And the reason why I wanted to post this is because I think that a lot of common issues are present in this one source, and I thought that if I explain why I evaluated it and offered suggestions for revision the way that I did, that any of you who have similar notes or comments on your feedback sheet for your project might better understand what my notes meant. So here we go. The problem that this student is hoping to support through literature, through a literature review, is does teaching in the Socratic method rather than lecture method help increase critical thinking among students? So that's a very interesting topic. First thing I would do is capitalize Socratic, since it is a noun that relates to a person, a proper noun, so capitalize that. And I don't like the fact that the word increase critical thinking is included in the problem, because it sort of leads the problem. In terms, I should say, it leads what you assume the solution is, or the effect should be. So I would just say, does teaching in the Socratic method, I would just get rid of rather than lecture method, and I would just put in the word effect. Does teaching in the Socratic method affect critical thinking among students? And notice that it's affect with an A because it's a verb, and not effect, which would be the noun. So that's just a simple way to help remove some inherent sort of bias in the problem itself. So if you had a note about that from me, I was just looking at trying to minimize a predisposed conclusion or assumption related to the problem at this point in the research. So now we go down to the very first source, and this looks like an excellent study to support this problem, because it's comparing the effects of simulation-based and traditional teaching methods in critical thinking abilities. So even though Socratic method isn't addressed specifically in this, I could see that this article might actually help us figure out, well, how does somebody measure critical thinking abilities in a particular population of students, and how would you compare different teaching methods? So it's definitely a study that I think could be used to support, in a broad sense, some research on this problem. And notice that this particular reference is formatted in APA well. I will put lowercase o for of, since that's how the journal title would actually be presented. And one thing that's really important is that this student did not include something in the citation here, in the reference, did not include retrieved from and then an address where this article might have been retrieved from. And many of you did include that. And I wrote in the notes that whereas I appreciate being able to have easy access to where you retrieved it from, the fact that this article was originally published in print form, then it can be accessed in a number of different ways. And so it's not appropriate necessarily to include retrieved from for an article that is actually a print-based article. Retrieved from is what you would include in the citation, in the reference for something that is only available online. So things like a web page or an article on a web page, then it would be appropriate to put retrieved from. Okay, just continuing on, this study utilized a static group pre-test, post-test design. So I really appreciated this level of detail about the method used, about the research design. So this was a somewhat experimental design, maybe quasi-experimental, but some of you included verbiage for the method used that was really, really broad. For example, many used that the method was the observation method. And that is not a method, a research method. That is a type of data collection procedure. But and certainly most studies include some level of observation in one fashion or another. So I was really looking in this case for you to be able to identify some of the broad methods that were presented earlier in the text, things like ethnography or experimentation, even survey methodology could have been included to a lesser extent. So that's why I included notes about that. And finally, I wanted to say something about operationalizing, because I did ask you to communicate how did the authors or the researchers, how did they operationalize the variables? And notice that in this paper, the student indicates that they, the researchers, operationalized the variables by applying the simulation-based teaching method to one group and not the other. So in that case, that explains a little bit about operationalizing the independent variable in this case. That is the thing that was different. But one of the really important variables in this case would be critical thinking and self-confidence, are those two variables. And how did they operationalize that? How did they measure critical thinking? So if you recall from the notes, operationalizing is a way of determining or indicating how you know something exists. How do you know critical thinking exists? And I assume in this study that they used some type of test or measurement for that, part of the pre-test and post-test, I would assume. So I would have been looking for a little more detail about how critical thinking and self-confidence, those two important dependent variables, were measured in the study. So that's what I meant by operationalizing. And again, if you had trouble with this, I included a note in the feedback. So I hope this little overview of how I evaluated some of these sources for you and included some notes, that those notes would maybe make a little more sense for you.